Welcome to episode 5 of the Bioenergetic View. In today's episode, we're joined by Jack and Dalton from Analyze and Optimize, and we'll be discussing how Jack and Dalton were introduced to the work of Ray Peat. We'll also discuss Robert Lustig's claims that fructose is as harmful to the liver as alcohol. We'll go over whether Jordan Peterson's serotonin hierarchy has any merit. We'll also discuss the negative effects of the carnivore diet, especially on gut health. We'll go over the link between birth control and cancer and the protective effects of progesterone, as well as what we think of Dave Asprey's thoughts on the Ray Peat diet. And with that, let's jump right in.
Okay, welcome to a Bioenergetic View, and we have Analyze and Optimize here, aka Dalton and Jack. And so they have taken the Twitter world by storm. How are you guys?
Good, man. How about you?
Good. I mean, it's just what you guys have been able to accomplish is nothing short of amazing, in my estimation. I like probably, I don't know, a few times a week, people tell me that they know of Ray Peat because of you guys. And so I think you guys are some of the premier kind of evangelists for the bioenergetic perspective.
First of all, thank you. All that stuff means a ton. And what I'm really trying to do with the Twitter and with a lot of this content, Instagram and whatever the case may be is kind of just to lay out the fundamentals, so I did like 3 or 4 threads about pregnenolone. I did one thread about why serotonin is involved in GI disease and things like that. And I find that because I feel like a lot of times when people are trying to get into this stuff, they have trouble like understanding it on that fundamental level. And then, you see guys taking 5 Idea Labs products and breathing into a bag and doing all this like stuff that is whatever we would consider to be much further down the line. But yeah, I guess one of the reasons why a lot of people have liked it is because, it's kind of like Pete pilling, if you will. It's kind of just like trying to introduce people to that. But yeah, so in terms of how we got into it, I mean, I was doing keto, fasting, carnivore, for about a year. Well, it was about 2.5 years. And then one of my buddies showed me, started talking to me about Pete stuff because he used to be a big carnivore diet guy. So yeah, he showed me generative energy, and I think he actually appeared on one of them, the Q&A ones. But yeah, so we started talking to me about why coffee is good for you and how Ray used to drink 20 cups a day when he was hypothyroid, and, why sugar is actually the preferred fuel source and all this crazy stuff. And, at this point, like I still had like my very rigid, high serotonin carnivore, perspective. But I was not having a good time. It was like the lockdowns and, I was struggling with my health still and all these types of things. So I ended up watching some generative energy probably for the first time around November, December of 2020. And yeah, I kind of just binged it from there till now, I guess. I still watch it all the time. So yeah, that was kind of our thing. And then, we had this slow progression from being like a very keto and fasting channel with the YouTube, which had been started like a year prior. And then, we came up with the first video about like, maybe why keto isn't good. And then we got a lot of hate for that. And then, a year later, we're debunking Robert Lustig's sugar the bitter truth talk, and, all hell breaks loose, I guess. So yeah, that's kind of been our sort of journey with this stuff.
The end of 2020 was an especially psychotic year to get into that podcast. But the first time I remember becoming aware of you guys was maybe, Dalton, you had given like a presentation at your school or something. Is that right? Like about seed oils?
Yeah. I posted that video. That was like late 2020. I'm shocked that you saw that. That was like one of our least viewed videos. But yeah. So so that was still while I was, sort of I was full blown keto carnivore fasting and things. But yeah, so I'd been, interested in learning about this stuff more. And I think it was only a matter of time before we kind of, were looking for things that provided more answers and more context and whatnot. And, that's kind of the whole idea, is that we're always looking for more information and more things that can, help us out and help understand these things better. But yeah, I remember commenting in one of your live chats before. It was like right after our serotonin video was released in like August or September of 2021. And I was like, Danny, you should like check this video. And you were like, oh yeah, I saw it. Like, I thought it was really good. And I was like very like starstruck in that moment, because like you guys had meant so much to me. I've been listening to you guys for, a couple months at that point, and it was such a huge paradigm shift. I was like, Danny, Roddy watched my video.
You noticed that an F-list internet celebrity had watched your video.
I think I peaked at that moment. It's all been down there. So,
well, I mean, you guys just bring something so unique to the table, like the video editing, like how high quality it is, and the research depth is just two things that you just don't see. And again, like I don't know how to edit a video to save my life, so seeing something like that is just absolutely incredible. So you guys have just a gift of explaining these things and breaking it down. So it's just so ridiculously valuable.
Thank you, man.
I was always curious, what's the dynamic with you guys? How is everything structured? Does one person do the research and then one guy is like making the videos and stuff? Like, how does the analyze and optimize system work?
So we pretty much have a bunch of ideas. Like, we have a Google Doc with like, I don't know, hundreds of ideas that, we just try to find what'll work and what we want to do most. And then depending on the topic, like Dalton does a lot more in depth on the science, and then I'll take some like history or kind of other stuff, and then we'll each write a script together, or each write it separately and then edit it together. Then one of us will record it, and then I'll pretty much do, Final Cut, the video editing stuff, and then we'll both be finding the clips and whatnot, and I'll kind of edit it together. And then that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I would say Jack is really what brings the videos to life and makes it not just some random guy droning on about God knows what. So he really, takes, what is basically like an article essentially, and turns it into like an experience, if you will. With the music and with the editing and the memes kind of stuff, just making it a much more engaging thing. But yeah, I come from a background of studying science and whatnot. Jack is he's always been, very adept at knowing about like historical, political, conspiracy kind of things, as long as I can remember. Because we grew up together. And
nice.
Literally as long as I can remember, like Jack was savvy about like all this kind of stuff. Like I literally remember in like 7th or 8th grade, Jack telling me about like the Illuminati and like how like Jay-Z was going like this. And
Jack,
and
you're my man, buddy.
So, it really is a match made in heaven. And then, so we both like share that skepticism of these institutions and whatnot, and how these things kind of work. So yeah, it's honestly like insane that it worked out the way that it did, growing up together, sharing these like complementing interests, and then eventually like going to college together, and then starting this. And yeah, the beautiful thing is that, we feel like we're still really just kind of hitting our stride now. And we have a lot of stuff that we want to accomplish going forward. So we want this to really be like our legacy.
That's awesome. So basically, Jack, you're like the like history, like contextual pieces, and then like bringing the video to life with the editing and the B-roll and the music and all type of stuff. And then Dalton, you're like diving into the biochemistry, and so you guys kind of like divide and conquer. That's awesome.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love the marriage, especially for anyone who's new to the space. The documentary style and contextualizing it with the history and politics helps so much to, I think, open someone's mind, right? If you just dig into this idea that polyunsaturated fats are harmful, or you might want to question the, anti-fructose narrative. It's a lot easier when you see the history of it. I love that Ray Peat always did that. And yeah, I think that the way you guys are doing that into documentary style videos is great. And you guys have done a number of really awesome ones that we want to highlight. You did the debunking of Robert Lustig's sugar presentation. You've done some good videos on serotonin.
Weight loss one was pretty cool too.
What's that, Mike?
That weight loss one was pretty cool too. Like just breaking down all these possible areas that could be affecting your weight loss.
Yeah. And there's a bunch on seed oils, which are awesome. And then, of course, the birth control one is the most recent, which is a really extensive one. But again, so much history to go through and so much misconception, which I love. And so we pulled out a bunch of clips for us to review here that are all based around a lot of these different narratives that are out there and documentaries that you guys have done on these topics. So yeah, I'm excited to dig into all those. Have you guys comment on them?
Awesome.
Yeah,
We
sounds good.
Yeah, we can start with Robert Lustig first. Here we go. Is fruit good or bad for you? And Jay, do you want to contextualize this clip? How did you find it?
Oh, I mean, it's, you guys did this again. You did this really great documentary on his Sugar the Bitter Truth presentation and pointing out some of the issues with the claims he made, and he makes some of them here. And his general notion that fructose is a poison, which he's literally said word for word, and so he kind of talks about that here and makes some claims as well about why that is entirely inapplicable to fruit, which maybe we'll challenge a little bit. So, yeah.
Well, everybody knows that fructose is bad for you, but I'll play this clip anyways.
The goal is to keep your consumption of added sugars below 25 grams a day. That would be 6 teaspoons. That's about what your liver can handle. Very similar to, by the way, to what your liver can do with alcohol. That's about as much as your liver can handle alcohol too. And the reason is because alcohol and fructose are metabolized the same way. So it makes sense that about 6 teaspoons of of sugar, therefore 3 teaspoons or 12 grams of fructose, 25 grams of sugar, because they're 50-50, would be sort of the maximum. If you eat whole food, you have nothing to worry about. Because if you eat whole food, your fructose content beyond fruit is minimal. And the fruit has fructose, but not very much, and you're not going to absorb it because of the fiber.
I don't know how you could argue with that, but I don't know. Dalton, do you want to take a stab at it?
Do I? There's quite a bit to unpack there. I would love to know where he's getting the 25 figure from. I would assume it's from some kind of like epidemiological work where they're kind of just looking at different populations and saying, oh, well, these people eat this much, and then these people eat this much, and then they're kind of manufacturing a threshold of sugar intake from there. But yeah, I also don't really know what he means when he says like how much it can handle. Like what is I assume he's implying that like past that you're going to get de novo lipogenesis, so you're going to start creating fat. But I just don't really understand where that really comes from. I think it's because fructose tends to be more lipogenic than straight glucose. But even with that considered, if you look at fatty liver disease, the vast majority of the fat contained in the liver is mainly from free fatty acids, which ironically is, what becomes elevated when you're fasting or stressed or obese or whatever the case may be. So there's that. But I don't really know where the 25 figure is coming from. And I've never really understood where this whole like alcohol parallel thing came from, because I think everyone knows at this point that glucose is something that, your body makes and that it metabolizes, that it needs. And fructose is not very far removed from glucose at all in terms of how it works metabolically. I mean, it undergoes 2 enzymatic steps, and then it basically goes into the same metabolic pathway that glucose does. So I don't know where this idea comes from, that it is metabolized at all similarly to alcohol. But he does that thing in his talk, and you see this picture like surface around quite a bit, where he has like this big picture of the cell, and then it's like all these arrows with all these different reactions and all this stuff. And if you don't understand biochemistry very well, then it's like very intimidating, and it's like some doctor talking with all this confidence, and you're like, oh wow, like, well, I already know sugar's bad, so he's got to be right. And then people just kind of run with it. But if you actually look inside that diagram, like a lot of the arrows and what he's implying, he kind of makes huge leaps of faith, if you will, in his assumptions of how this stuff works. When in reality, it's not really my understanding of fructose metabolism. And one thing I want to point out is that a lot of the studies that are done showing that fructose is really bad is typically with isolated fructose. And that is a problem because isolated fructose is very, very poorly absorbed in your intestines. And then it is basically it's basically left over to the colonic bacteria where it ferments and things. And this is where, you can get as little as like 15 grams of isolated fructose. I think the figure is that will cause GI problems in about 50% of healthy people. So it's very poorly absorbed on its own. So what happens is that when you co-administer glucose, or you're giving sucrose, which is a link of fructose and glucose, the intestinal absorption of fructose shoots up dramatically, and you absorb pretty much all of it. And I think it's pretty unclear as to why that is, but we do know that glucose basically upregulates the absorption of fructose. So that's a big deal, because if you have the fructose not getting absorbed and then it's feeding these colonic bacteria, it's causing all this irritation in the gut, probably elevating serotonin, causing some element of intestinal permeability that can cause systemic inflammation. And that is really going to drive all these different conditions, not the fructose being metabolized itself, I don't think. And then you can see in some of these studies, you can administer antibiotics alongside the isolated fructose and largely protect against those effects of the isolated fructose. So those would be my main comments on that. Again, we did the whole video, which by the way is like by far our most hated video, because it's really funny, because we have, everyone's like sees us as like these like freedom fighters that come in and like dismantle these like arguments about like big pharma and big food, and like they're like, yeah, like you guys are really like doing great stuff, like destroying these like big corporations. And then it's like you look at the comments under the Lustig video, and it's like these guys are just paid off by big sugar. They have no idea what they're talking about. How much did you get paid to do this? Like, is pretty funny.
Well, I mean, Dalton, you should disclose your Domino funding, your Domino sugar funding. I think that's disingenuous that you don't disclose that on your videos.
Yeah, I mean, we get called shills for a lot of things. We got, we did the whole video on methylene blue. People were saying like, oh my God, this is like a carcinogen. It's so dangerous. Like you're going to give people serotonin syndrome and all these things. I remember one comment literally said, drip, drip, blood, so much blood on your hands from talking about taking low dose methylene blue. So it can honestly like get in your head at points. And I'm like, am I causing harm? And then I'm like, no, like that's not, they're not even coming with anything substantial in a lot of those instances. But yeah, we get accused of being shills quite a bit. So but yeah, if we had some kind of commission to sell sugar, like please believe we would advertise that, and we would take our cuts. So
it's just funny hearing like people say that we're shills for anything. It gives you kind of a new lens, because a lot of people say that a lot of other people are controlled opposition or whatever. And then it's like people calling us that kind of just like opened my eyes that like maybe not everyone's controlled opposition. I mean, obviously some people are, but it's just funny. Like, yeah, literally two guys just making videos, and people think that we're getting paid off by like sugar lobbyists. Like we're going in the back rooms and everyone's in suits.
Unfortunately, Jack, that's exactly what controlled opposition would claim. So I'm going to have to put you in that camp.
Yeah.
So sometimes when I'm thinking, oh man, like I got so much heat for this or that, and then I'm thinking like, well, how did Ray feel doing this for like 50 plus years? You know, like it really puts things into perspective when you've been doing it for 10 years and he's been doing it for so much longer. And like swimming upstream can take a lot out of a person, but that's why it's good to find hobbies.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's
like
funny
chickens,
too.
like chicken farming.
Yeah, exactly.
Chicken farming. It's funny when you read the research too on fructose, like people talk about being like a shill for something. And then you go through the studies with fructose and you see all the problems, and you see every single article just starts out like fructose is increased, like high fructose corn syrup, all this type of stuff. And it's a health problem and whatnot. And then you go and look at the evidence. And you go and look at like what the studies are actually showing. You know, you have Lustig talking about 6 grams or 12 grams of fructose being a problem. And then when you look in the research, they're giving people 0.75 grams of fructose per kilogram of body weight. So I'm like 90 kilos or say I'm 100 kilos. That's 75 grams of fructose in one sitting, which would be the equivalent of 150 grams of sugar, and then not really finding massive problems in healthy people. And so it's like you're looking at that, and you're looking at what they're doing in rats with fructose and whatnot. And it's like there's a difference in ability for the rats to actually metabolize fructose compared to humans. And then as to what you were talking about there, Dalton, is they actually find increased portal blood levels of endotoxin after fructose challenges in animals. So that it's literally can create endotoxin. Endotoxin can upregulate the inflammatory pathways in the liver. I think Lustig is saying that the J&K pathway is the one that is triggering issues from fructose in both alcohol. And then just like this blanket statement that, oh, they're metabolized the same. And then you go and look at the metabolism of alcohol versus fructose. And it's like fructose being converted into lactate, glucose, ATP with like a less than 3% de novo lipogenesis. And then you look at alcohol and it's like gets converted into acetaldehyde and then creates a whole bunch of ROS and like damage to the liver structure. And it's like, where is the comparison? Like you're talking about this one downstream pathway and it could be related to these other factors. And then you're seeing like the difference between the metabolites of fructose and alcohol. And like it's not even the same thing. Like they're not even close to comparable. So this type of argument, I don't know where he's getting, you know, that 25 gram recommendation. Like it's especially because they have the isotope tracer studies where they give people sugar and they have the sugar molecules tagged so you can see like how they're metabolized in the body. And you're not seeing these problems that people are talking about. You're not really seeing high levels of fat production from fructose. You're not seeing it cause high levels of inflammation. You're not seeing changes in people's liver function values or their uric acid or anything like that. So it's just like that's baseless claims. And it's even supported further when he starts talking about like, well, fruit is fine because fiber inhibits fructose absorption. It's like, that is completely false. Like you are going to get the fructose from the fruit that you're going to eat. If it has a marginal decrease in absorption, it's still like irrelevant to the overall picture. And the other thing too is like 3 oranges will give you that amount of fructose that he's saying is absolutely toxic. And there's no studies really supporting that fruits or fruit juice or anything like that is actually causing these metabolic issues in healthy people. What you're seeing more so is like if you take diabetic people and you dose them with fructose by itself, or you give them ridiculously high doses of sucrose in overfeeding studies, yeah, then they have problems. But it's like you can't parse that out between overfeeding. So there's no support for these claims. And then let's wax this one pathway, you know, and then when you have cognitive dissonance that fruit isn't causing these problems, then we have to say, oh, you know, fiber is the reason. It's because fiber is inhibiting absorption. And it's like this is not like, that's not, as a researcher, that is like questionable to just make claims like that and like push that out to people as if this is how it actually is. Those types of things. There's only one study I've seen, some random Iranian study that showed feeding people like fruit some fruit products, which included a whole group of things, possibly caused issues. And the rest of them is like, orange juice does this, like, you know, it improves these values, or grape juice improves these values, whatever the deal is. So the Lustig thing, yeah, we've talked about it ad nauseum as well, even on Energy Balance or on this podcast. It's ridiculous, the things that get said there.
And they are the most hated on videos for sure. I mean, just like you guys said, the comments, people feel really defensive for Robert Lustig here. And yeah, I mean, these claims, some of them are ridiculous. I mean, to call fructose a poison and then to say that if you have it with fiber, it's fine. Like anything that's an actual poison, we're talking mercury, arsenic, like real poisons, having fiber with it doesn't do anything. It's not going to save you from consuming those things. And it's not going to also prevent fructose absorption, as you were saying, Mike. And this idea that 12 grams is what the liver can handle is insane. There's no, like, the evidence for this is not there at all. I mean, for one, our livers are incredibly effective at handling fructose. As you were saying, they oxidize it, convert it to glycogen, or convert it to glucose or lactate and send it out. And the study is looking at even pure fructose, looking at like a 30-gram bolus versus 60-gram in humans. We handle it just as well. And that's pure fructose, not considering all of the absorption issues you guys have mentioned as well. And to compare it to alcohol like he does is just disingenuous. There's two pathways he points to. One is the J and K inflammation pathway, and the other is de novo lipogenesis, which are heavily disfavored pathways when it comes to fructose. Like 99% of that fructose is not going to be influencing those pathways. But he uses rat studies where they're given pure fructose, massive amounts of endotoxin and polyunsaturated fats, which if you account for the endotoxin and polyunsaturated fats, that effect of fructose goes away even in the rats. So we know that avoiding fructose is not the solution, but when it comes to creating a diet to help you maximize your metabolism, there's a lot of conflicting information out there. And that's why I've created the Energy Balance Food Guide to help you determine exactly what to eat to optimally support your metabolism and help you lose weight, improve your digestion, get amazing sleep, boost your energy, and so much more. The Energy Balance Food Guide is a one-page infographic that organizes foods on a spectrum based on how effectively they support your metabolism. And it also has a separate spectrum that adjusts the scale for you in the case that you're dealing with various digestive symptoms. The food guide makes it extremely easy to get started with a bioenergetic approach to optimizing your health. So head over to jfeldmanwellness.com/guide to download your free Energy Balance Food Guide. Yeah, it's you guys did a great video talking, and could say debunking, even though I hate that word. His
yeah
presentation.
Honestly, there were probably a number of things that I would have done differently with that video, looking back on it. But yeah, I would agree that like the debunk thing is a bit authoritarian in and of itself. So I would agree with that. I would actually
supposed to be a critique. Sorry. I think it's just overused and
yeah, no, I mean,
go ahead.
For sure. But I would even go a step further and say like even like just white sugar again is different from isolated fructose or even things like high fructose corn syrup. And you know, we did a whole I did a whole thread on Twitter about this, which people were exploding over, but basically showing that in the pre, I would say 60s era, it was very common for families to be, you know, a lot of it's per capita, just like purchasing data, but it was very normal for families to allocate essentially like 100 grams of white sugar per day per person in the household. So even if you were to account for waste there, which is like at best like 5 or 10%, you're still talking about massive loads of just pure white sugar. And that's exactly what they use in some of the animal studies for I know Kyle has mentioned this before on one of Danny's older generative energies, but what they use for the control diets in animals a lot of the times, if you're doing a low fat diet, it'll be typically like 70% carbohydrate and like 35% of that will come from pure sugar, and that's what you're using in order to keep the animals lean because you know it's going to maintain them at this weight. It's literally the diet that you use to compare what you think is going to be unhealthy because you're so sure it's going to keep the animals lean and free of disease. So yeah, and then you could talk about Walter Kempner and the rice diet, and then there were a number of other studies, from decades ago where they were giving people with diabetes simple sugars and seeing massive improvements. So yeah, I mean, I think you guys nailed it. I think it's a lot different of a story when you're talking about isolated fructose, or when you're talking about overfeeding, or when you're talking about giving it to people that are already unhealthy. Because another thing that upregulates your de novo lipogenesis is cortisol, which is like basically uniformly elevated in people with diabetes or obesity. So obviously you're going to see a worse outcome there. So yeah.
And that's not even to say that, like, I think most people, when you're making dietary recommendations for carbohydrates inside the bioenergetic sphere, it's not like just load up on granulated sugar. So it's like there's even like another degree separate. It's like, get your carbs from, like, if you tolerate dairy, some good dairy products, and then some high quality fruit and like high quality juices and things along those lines. And then it's like, now you have tons of modifying factors, right? You have the polyphenolic compounds, you have some of the fibers if you have fruit, and it's not because it's inhibiting absorption. And you also have the vitamins and minerals that are coming with those juices and those fruits. So it's like, this is massively different. I would love to see a study where they take rats and the carbohydrate source is like fruit and juice. Like, you just don't see that, right? It's just it's always some granulated sugar, or even in the caloric restriction studies where they gave the rats like the healthy diet. It was like soybean meal and corn meal and fish meal and like things that this wasn't even rats. This was monkeys that monkeys don't even eat. Like, it's not even a monkey's diet. And it's still some type of like lab diet with these structured components that, these animals would never have eaten. So it's just funny. Like, where people are like splitting hairs about, oh, it's fructose. And then without even understanding the metabolism. And then like the argument becomes, oh, well, sugar is bad. And it's like, even if you wanted to say sugar is bad, even Lustig, he cannot sit there and say, okay, well, sugar is bad, but fruits are okay. But we're just going to wax some reason as why fruits are okay. And it's probably because you're not absorbing the sugar. It has nothing to do with the fact that the sugar isn't inherently a problem and the fruits are actually healthy. It's just the fiber. So it's like, that's where you see that. It's like, that is a level 10 rationalization. And that type of thing is just, I don't know. Like, I look at that, I'm just like, come on, man. Like, try to figure out why you have a paradox instead of just wax fiber. Like, it's such a lazy way out, if you like.
Jack, do you want to mention anything, or should we head on to serotonin?
Yeah, I mean, that's, like you said, it's a big rationalization. That's a problem with getting stuck in a framework, and then you got to rationalize all these different things, and then it starts to not make sense instead of kind of just looking at it all from a big perspective and seeing what's actually going on, which I think, people in this space do probably better than anyone.
Jack, that's a perfect segue to our next clip.
Perfect.
And also,
planned.
You guys talk a lot about fructose, and I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to still unfortunately have to think that it's the devil. But here's Jordan Peterson talking about serotonin and hierarchy. So here we go.
You have a system, the serotonin system, base of your neurophysiology. It also sets your brain up during embryonic development. So it really is the master control system in many, many ways. And it counts where you are in your hierarchy. And then it decides how much positive emotion and how much negative emotion you should feel on average because of your position. And so, like, if you're, let's say number 1 is at the top and number 10 is at the bottom. So you're number 10, you're barely clinging to the bottom of reality. Your brain says, look, it's dangerous where you are at the bottom of the hierarchy. You don't have a lot of friends. It's precarious down there. And so that means any little thing that goes wrong, any little error you make, that might be the end of you. And so you better be on guard and alert. And if something small happens, it better hurt, because it might be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
What is Jordan right about? What is he wrong about? Anybody can
make my bed in the morning.
I would say I think he's right. I think he's right in saying that it is a master controller in a sense, because I'm sure you guys have seen this a ton, but you can do a lot of things that are pro-metabolic, if you will, with people, and it's not going to matter unless they fix their gut. Because
100%.
I think serotonin is such that, like, it really is a master regulator in that sense, where dietary changes or vitamin D or grounding or whatever the case may be, light environment, those can all be so insignificant if you have chronic irritation or something going on in the gut that's producing a lot of serotonin. So I definitely agree that it's a master controller in that sense. In terms of the hierarchical stuff, again, it's hard for me to say like precisely where his referencing of whatever research is wrong, because I'm not really familiar with what he is referencing. But from what I understand about serotonin, and I've done probably too much reading on this topic because it seems to be very illuminating for a lot of people, is that it is very closely involved in something called learned helplessness. So in experiments where you are taking animals and you're subjecting them to stresses that they eventually learn, they can't escape from no matter what they try. Basically, that will turn up the serotonergic system in the brain. And then that they develop this behavior where they just kind of give up. And that is something that, really resonates with a lot of people, because a lot of people feel like they have no answers in their life. They have no way of getting out of a certain routine or situation that they're in their life. So that's something that really seems to resonate with a lot of people. And then the other thing is that if you administer either serotonin antagonists or dopaminergic drugs, you can completely reverse that. You can, create an animal that is going to keep trying to escape, no matter basically what the odds are, which is pretty awesome. And then one of the other things about serotonin that I was reading about relatively recently is that it is often involved in like risk aversion and in circumstances where you're trying to appraise like the value of something. So essentially, there were a number of different human and animal studies where they were in like sort of a game situation. And the people that, would take SSRIs, and, it's obviously not a perfect way of going about it, but, people that would take SSRIs, they would be in this game and they would spend less time making decisions. They would value the outcome of their decisions less. They would take less risk, and ultimately they would just care less about the whole situation. Whereas people that, did not have that, they ended up caring more, and they were more willing to take risks and think about the outcomes. Whereas the people on the serotonergic drugs were more just like, yeah, sure, like whatever, like I'll do this, like I'll just do whatever is going to get me through this. And they don't think about it. They don't value it nearly as much. And that was true in some animal studies where they looked at basically like foraging. So if you were to upregulate the serotonergic system in certain animals, they would basically, if they found like a foraging patch that gave them, what they wanted, they would never like deviate from that patch. Like they would only stay in that patch, and they would continue to exploit it no matter what. And the interpretation of that was that, yeah, like because it has this sort of anti-metabolic effect, they're basically exploiting whatever is right in front of them. So those are just some of the things that I've been reading about recently as it pertains to serotonin. And the thing is, it's like sugar in the sense that everyone already, like the prevailing wisdom is really that like we already know that serotonin is good, or like we already know that sugar is bad. So we're really just trying to figure out what the mechanism is behind why it's good or it's bad. And then you read, I read one of these studies, and they were like, they were going through this whole thing about why serotonin made you less willing to sample information, made you care less about your decisions, made you more less willing to take risks. And then the conclusion, they're like, yeah, like in a world of so much information and so many decisions to make, like serotonin is like this valuable chemical that allows us to make decisions and stop looking for answers. I'm just like, but that really like sums it all up right there, right? Because no matter what the study is showing, it's going to paint serotonin in a positive light. And I guess that's kind of what's going on there. But for anyone that has struggled with learned helplessness, or anhedonia is another big thing, where you're basically unmotivated to do things. You don't really feel like you have a purpose, or maybe you like lose your appetite or your sex drive, and basically like you just don't really want to do things. And it's obviously associated with a lack of dopamine, but the lack of dopamine tends to be driven by higher serotonin. So I think that what he's trying to lay out there, there are roles of serotonin in those systems. But in terms of it being this thing where you have high serotonin and then you're like the god amongst men, and then you have low serotonin and you're about to fall off the cliff. In my estimation, it would pretty much be the opposite. As far as I could tell.
Yeah. And I mean, it's quite a mixed bag too with the serotonin stuff as well, right? Because there's some studies in the primates, and we were talking about this before, but they had primates where they had achieved like a high social status, and then they induced a serotonergic state in them. They made them more serotonergic, and then they lost their status. And then in some of the animals that were at the absolute bottom of the hierarchy, they would like induce serotonin in them, and it made them like more amenable to kind of work with the group and slightly improve status. But like this is again like the results with the serotonin components are not super clear. And I think the research, like they're having a difficult time trying to parse out what the principle is behind serotonin overall. And I think part of the problem, and you touched on this, is that it's hard to delineate what's going on if you're using serotonergic drugs to drive the states that you want to see with serotonin, because you have such a mixed bag effect from all these different drugs and some of the antagonists that they test. And even inside the Peat sphere, there's been talk around like some of the benefits that people feel from things like SSRIs and some of these drugs that get promoted for their pro-serotonergic effects is possibly not related to the actual serotonergic effects. It could be related to some other pleiotropic or like off-target mechanisms. I think the one that people often discuss in the sphere is the effects on neurosteroids of some of the serotonin-based drugs. And so there could be other mechanisms. It's like the same thing with statins. There's other mechanisms of statins that can have some benefits that aren't related to nuking your cholesterol levels. So though it's important to understand, are we really fully driving serotonin and we're seeing these effects because of serotonin alone? Or is there other pieces at play? The other thing that I think is really important is like when Jordan is talking about, oh, you're down and you're at the bottom and you're defeated and you're under all this stress. Like that's not just serotonin. That's cortisol. That's prolactin. That's the catecholamines.
He's saying that's low serotonin, by the way.
Okay. Yeah. So either way, you're seeing like a variety of stress hormones in that state as well. That's hugely problematic. Like in that, if you're in that state, you're also probably going to nuke out your sex steroids like testosterone and progesterone and whatnot through prolactin lowering it. So it's like you can look at serotonin, but this is important of like looking at the whole picture in context and trying to understand how are these things moving together? Like what is the relationship to these components and what drives the context? And so it's not just like a serotonergic state or a non-serotonergic state. It's like you have a serotonergic component going on in conjunction with a hypothyroid state, in conjunction with hypogonadism and an upregulation of the adrenals. So like there's this whole picture I think is important to see with how people are functioning, because they don't move independent of each other. It's like when you move into that stress state, you will downregulate thyroid and androgens and progestogens and like the sex steroids in general and raise the adrenal state. And then that will also start to push some of the serotonergic effects and whatnot. You start to dig into that, right? And so, or like, as you were saying, if you have gut issues, and this is something I think there's this discrepancy here inside the research and like versus the mainstream perspective. Peripheral serotonin in the research is a problem. Like they already say it causes all these issues. And it's just like central serotonin is this happy hormone, but peripherally, like God forbid, if you are obese or you get diabetes or whatnot. So it's like there's these like weird paradoxes. So it's, there's that piece going on. And it's like the serotonin from the gut will cause tons of issues. So like you can have people have gut issues, and no matter how much progesterone and thyroid and all these things that you take, you're like still seriously having that go on. A lot of people don't respond, or they get weird responses, and it's like, oh, progesterone is just not for me. And it's like, well, maybe maybe there's things that you have to adjust so that you like respond to it much better. It's also, I guess the last point here is weird because it's like all these spheres, even the alternative spheres, like pro serotonin, pro catecholamines, pro growth hormone, pro estrogen. And we're going to talk about all that's like literally like pushing the worst things, like the stress things, the things that cause all of these problems. And that's why when you guys make these videos in like this documentary style, it's super digestible for people, and you're like giving them perspective that they would never get to have to see, like this, like these hormones that people are optimizing for, this is not good. Like maybe you feel good in the short term, maybe, but then downstream it's like, well, why are people falling off carnivore? Why are they falling off keto? Why are they falling out of the biohacking sphere? It's like, because they are literally optimizing for these stress things. They're driving themselves into these terrible states.
Yeah, totally. And you have Jordan here purveying the same serotonin as a happy hormone, and then adding in serotonin is the dominance hormone. And that when you're low in serotonin, you're high in anxiety and alertness. And when you're high in serotonin, you're high in this positive emotion and you're at the top of the chain. And it's the complete opposite of the reality. It's, again, like we see this in the primate studies. You guys cited a really great one in your documentary showing that adding serotonin or increasing serotonergic activity actually reversed dominance, like it reduced dominance, and it did at the same time increase aggression, which is the other thing that Jordan Peterson is conflating here, is aggression with dominance. And I think that's one of the, like another really harmful notion to be putting forth. And it's true that serotonin does increase aggression and violence. And you see that, you guys pointed this out, all like this connection with all the school shootings and these people being on SSRIs. And it's starting to be put out in the literature finally that it's not as simple as serotonin being the happy hormone. I mean, it's been in there for decades, but it's starting to gain a little bit of publicity there. But yeah, it's the opposite, right? You guys mentioned serotonin is a hormone of learned helplessness. It's a hormone of hibernation. It increases weight gain. It decreases libido. It suppresses appetite. It increases anhedonia. Like, this is not something that we want to be orienting our life toward increasing. We'd want to do the exact opposite. Yeah.
Speaking of, I think what you said earlier, Dalton, is really important, that people that seem the most out of touch with their body seem like they have the most either extreme constipation or really bad diarrhea. And so if all the purpose of all this stuff is to try to get in touch with yourself and what your body is telling you, I thought I had never heard this before, what you guys had said in, where did you guys first say this, on Twitter? I'm sorry, you can't see. Sugar cravings are actually excellent sign of youth and health.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then Dr. Baker.
That's what I have. That's what I have up here. So Hong Kong, do you guys just want to explain this? Because I think it's worth highlighting, because I'd never heard it before.
Oh, the sugar cravings being a sign of like health and youth.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's used in it's literally called like the sucrose preference test, but it's one of these tests they use in research to gauge whether animals are undergoing like a chronic stress or anhedonia, really. You know, I guess you can argue about the validity of any, you know, rodent test, you know, whether you're looking at, you know, how fast they go through a maze, or, you know, whether they're in the open field or whether they're swimming. You know, it can be hard to parse out the behavioral effects in animals in comparison to humans. But that's why I included another study that basically, you know, showed what everyone already knows, which is that younger children and young adults have a much higher preference for sugar than older people do. And, you know, I was trying to put those together and say, like, hey, like, as we age, our metabolic rates decline. People inevitably get, you know, crabby, and they start acting less youthful, but their sugar cravings go down alongside that. And I was trying to make the case that, you know, not having a craving for sugar is not a good thing, which seems to be, you know, a big target behind pretty much any health paradigm, is how do I reduce my sugar cravings? I think that there are cases where, you can identify if something is pathological. Maybe you have like a yeast overgrowth or something, or you parasites where, you have like these like insane cravings. And yeah, that should be highlighted, but it's not normal, for people to like want to lose their appetite. It's not normal for people to, try to lose their intuitive cravings, which seems to be, again, one of these things that a lot of these health paradigms are pushing, is to like basically put your body in a situation where it's not in touch with its cravings, which, is not exactly a good thing. And then, it's the same story, Dr. Baker basically, I think he quoted it and he just like called me a clown in whatever way. And then, I just get barraged with all of this stuff.
They're all soon to be Ray Peat people. So it's just, you just got to give them some more time, I think.
Yeah. The comments there were bad. The comments under your thread were like, they were kind of laughable overall. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, at a certain, I think I saw that. Like, I woke up one morning and then I saw that Baker had quoted it, and I was like, I'm just gonna mute this tweet and I'm just gonna go about my day.
But seriously, how many long-standing carnivores are left? I mean, like since 2018, I would say 90% of the major ones are all not doing it anymore. Like, Baker is literally one of the last standing long-term carnivores.
Yeah, he is, and I guess Peterson as well, but
if you count his benzos as part of his diet.
Peterson's not even long standing, right? Peterson's only been doing this for a couple of years, the carnivore stuff.
Yeah,
like I don't think he's Baker and some of the other carnivores go back, I think, further. I think Peterson is like relatively new, because his daughter had hopped on it first, and then she got him into it like in the late 2000 teens or early 2020s. So I think like they're still newer on it.
I don't even think Baker has been doing it for that long. Like, because he was framing it on Joe Rogan like it was an experiment that he was doing, and I thought that was in like 2016. So it hasn't. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't think it was that long.
Yeah, I think
I don't know. I feel like that. Yeah, but I feel like that is a really long time.
Yeah,
you're talking about 6 or 7 years, because the classic story that gets presented to me is like, oh, I was on this for like 6 months to a year and everything was great until shit just completely hit the fan at 6 to 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
So when I hear about people being on it for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, I'm like, that kind of is like,
yeah. Usually with people that I work with, it's usually like I was on carnivore, I was doing good, and then I got some like really bad GI infection or like something like that, and then it's all downhill after that. And so I think that is like the body's breaking point for multiple reasons with the carnivore piece, and it's like it's just not the same. And the worst thing too is like people then jump ship to whatever other diet, vegan, bioenergetic, whatever the deal is, and then it's not organized appropriately, because you just like kind of go from like super caloric restriction, 1 meal a day, like only protein and like some fat and things like that. And then now it's like carbs galore and like all this like unlimited food, all this type of stuff. Don't worry about intake, all these things. And then they gain a little bit of weight and then they jump back, try to jump back into carnivore or keto.
Mm-hmm.
And then it doesn't work anymore. And that is such a classic presentation I see over and over again. So there's something goes on there. Like I have some hypothesis about what goes on at that point. I don't know if we want to like extend that out in this section here, but
I have some theories about that as well. So one thing I've been reading about, and I guess I'm answering that question with a yes. I do want to talk about that. So I was reading about intestinal immunity over the last couple of weeks. And one thing that doesn't get talked about is that you actually produce antimicrobial peptides endogenously in your intestine. And what is interesting is that your enterocytes, so your small intestinal cells, they run primarily on glucose. So I thought that was interesting. You have the production of these antimicrobial peptides. So I'm sure you you guys are familiar with cathelicidin, which is produced from
Yep.
vitamin D. But you also have other ones. I think they're called like alpha and beta defensins. They're basically these proteins that your intestine produces in order to stave off a certain bacterial load further up in the digestive tract, so that you're not like basically overwhelmed with bacteria in the colon. And what I thought was interesting is that the enterocytes, as well as these cells called Paneth cells, I believe they're called, but they basically their sole role is to produce these antimicrobial peptides. And those cells are also highly glycolytic, so they depend a lot on glucose. And then you obviously have the issues with elevated cortisol and that potentially suppressing immunity as well. And I think it really can set you up in a situation where your intestinal immunity is very compromised over a given period of time without carbohydrates and things. And then, that's pretty much further confirmed by the fact that we know that intestinal serotonin tends to go up with starvation or fasting. You can see this in people that practice fasting during Ramadan, and then also in animal studies, they actually call it like an adaptive mechanism to fasting, because it acts as a stress hormone. It suppresses the appetite. It allows for more lipolysis and more gluconeogenesis, and it's an energy conservation mechanism. So I think, and then going off of that, another interesting point, something that I've been reading about a little bit more as it pertains to the gut, is something called quorum sensing. And quorum sensing is basically this bacterial communication mechanism that, if you have a bunch of microbes in your gut, they will be communicating using these various molecules, and then they can create biofilms. And these biofilms can really set you up for a lot of problems. That's where you can get a lot of antibiotic resistance, because this biofilm is essentially like, imagine, having like 10 people outside in the middle of the field. That would be like a bacteria without a biofilm, versus like those 10 people like building a house and like building a fire and like, having all these resources. That obviously makes it much more difficult to kill, basically. So that's essentially what's going on there. And serotonin is actually one of the primary drivers of quorum sensing in the intestine. So you can really have the perfect storm where you're doing lots of fasting, you're doing the carbohydrate restriction, you're elevating cortisol, you're elevating serotonin, which is independently probably driving the HPA axis as well. That's suppressing immunity. You have, an impaired ability to clear out the microbes. And then because there's all this serotonin production going on, it's basically becomes a self-reinforcing mechanism where the bacteria are using the serotonin that's already being produced to continue to spread and become more virulent. So that is probably my best take on the whole thing. And it is, Mike, you definitely nailed it. I mean, the amount of times that people will say like, dude, what happened to you exactly happened to me. It was like, I was on keto and carnivore and it was going great. I was doing lots of fasting. And then, bam, my gut got destroyed. I got the coated tongue, got the bloating. I had zero appetite, all these things. And yeah, I mean, at a certain point, you need to recognize that this is a consistent pattern and try to come up with some answers. So,
or you can just eat more steak.
More steak and more salt.
That's what I recommend.
Exactly.
I literally had this.
Go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Danny.
I was going to say.
Go ahead.
I was just going to mention the paper. I think maybe it's a Science Daily article. It's called like an aspirin a day keeps the biofilm away. But I just thought of that when you were talking. Go ahead, Mike.
There's the carnivore.
I read that. That's cool.
The carnivore stuff. I had like similar ideas, but I came about it at a different angle. So there's a couple things. When you have protein going to the colon, you don't really form as much like short chain fatty acids, so that doesn't feed the colon, the colonocytes. And then what you wind up getting is branched chain fatty acids and like some toxic metabolites, ammonia, hydrogen sulfide and whatnot. So carnivores literally build that up in the colon. And if you ever look at like a carnivore stool profile, you tend to see like a bunch of gram-negative bacteria and like elevations in SIGA, secretory IgA, and then zonulin tends to be elevated, which is a marker of permeability. So So you start to see that. And I think, so you create that dysbiosis inside the colon from all the meat, even though you don't have the fermentation going on in the small intestine. And I think because the carb intake is so low, mucus production in the colon can start to get impaired as well. And so then you have the bacteria able to like reach the colonic epithelium instead of sit on that mucus layer. And that triggers immune responses and all these problems. So I think it's only a matter of time until that starts to hit. The other thing that happens is, and it's along the biofilm line, is that the catecholamines actually drive biofilm formation as well. And they also tend to drive bacterial growth. Like they worsen infection because they have a bit of an immunosuppressive effect as well. So it's like the stress hormones plus the effect of the bile acids, which also induces serotonergic release inside the colon because they irritate them, plus the amino acid metabolites. And then this like toxic microbiome that forms. I think at a certain point, like the body's just like, that's it, it's done. Plus you have all the hormonal aberrations that come with that long term. So yeah, I was thinking along the same lines, but like just through different mechanisms, because it always starts with that gut situation, right? You get jacked up gut and then boom, it's like, I can't do carnivore or keto or whatever anymore.
Well, and if it's not that, it's insomnia, it's the libido and testosterone tanking, and the low T3, which is a clear effect of this situation, not only is going to cause those issues, but also is going to predispose you to bacterial overgrowths, reduce motility, reduce stomach acid. I mean, it's a recipe for gut issues there, in addition to, as you said, high stress hormones, which reduces the immune activity, reduces blood flow to the intestines, and also plus the excess protein leading to colonic fermentation and a shift into some pretty harmful microbes producing things like hydrogen sulfide and other toxic products. So yeah, and circling back to the original post here, these are all things that are going to reduce appetite and reduce carb cravings. And things that do that are things that tend to make you less alive, right? Tend toward starvation, tend toward conservation, where your body is hibernating, very similar to the high serotonin state we were talking about before. And so obviously the response here is, oh, well, you guys are shills for sugar and whatnot. But yeah, if you're forcing yourself into that state, a like where you're comfortable on a low calorie, low carb diet, that's a pretty severely hypometabolic state to be in. So
yeah. The other thing that people don't know is that in infants in the NICU, so neonatal intensive care unit, they give children sucrose as an analgesic, as a pain reliever. So they literally like give them a swab of
it's a drug, bro.
It's like
there it is. Got me. But there's that. And then in studies, so there's like all the psychological studies. What they do is they will look at people's cortisol levels in response to different stressors, like putting their hands in really cold water, or like they give them these dumb tests that stress them out, these memory tests. And if you preload them with carbohydrate, sucrose, they actually have lower glucocorticoid responses, lower cortisol responses. And then if you stress them out and then give them carbohydrate after, you lower their glucocorticoid response. And it's known from the endocrinology research that people, when they are under stress, automatically start to crave hyper palatable foods, which is essentially just carbs and fats. But it makes sense that you're craving this because the stress hormones are liberating that substrate, and your body is trying to intelligently make a decision and say, I could either break down all of my structure and then downregulate my metabolism, or I could just go out and have a chocolate chip cookie. And it's like, chocolate chip cookie it is. And it's like, how can you blame people for trying to cope with their stress in as intelligent a way as possible? I feel like the idea of like your cravings are inherently wrong. It's like original sin applied to nutrition. It's like what you like, your inclinations are inherently wrong. Like, don't follow them. You have to completely ignore them. And then, they will get you into trouble. It's like, or instead of going for the chocolate chip cookie, you could just go get, a piece of fruit or some chocolate or something along those lines that maybe isn't loaded with polyunsaturated fats and like reduced iron and whatever additives, and still manage the cravings and not gain the weight and have all these problems. Because the thing is, and we're going to get to I think we'll get to this at some point today, but the people back in the day, like this obesity thing didn't exist like to any significant extent before the 1950s or so. Like it was such a small percentage of people, and it's exploded afterwards. And it's like, yeah, people were trying to cope with stress, I'm sure, with carbohydrate and different foods for centuries. I don't think that is like changed. It's just now the options to meet those things have changed. And that seems more of the problem than just, it's sugar or whatever the deal is. Because again, as you were saying, Dalton, previously, there's access to sugar back in the 1950s at 100 pounds per year or something you're saying, or 100 equivalent to like 100 grams a day, something along those lines. So it's like,
yeah,
it's not like sugar has,
and that's just, and that was just white sugar, right? So they were eating, potatoes, and they were eating lots of bread. They would have plenty of fruits and well-cooked vegetables on top of that, and juices. So yeah, I mean, I had calculated it out, and it was pretty. The diet that I had come up with was basically that they were eating actually very remarkably similar to what Ray had recommended, which was like 100 grams of protein, around 300 to 400 grams of carbohydrate, and then the fat could be anywhere from around 70 to, it was mostly saturated because you're talking about cream and butter and milk and things, but it was 70 to like 120 grams, and yeah, I mean, it was peaty, if you will. It was like what they were eating. And yeah, and I think it's really interesting because they, a lot of these like primal, carnivore or paleo or whatever the case may be, they love to talk about ancestors, but they don't look at the ancestors that we have the best like actual available data on, which is the ancestors from like 100 years ago. Instead, we're talking about ancestors from a million years ago, where you're pretty much completely in fantasy land at that point, right? But if you just look at 100 years ago, I mean, we were recording a lot of things, and we have a lot of information about that era, and it was pretty clear, what we were eating and how healthy we were. So
I get all my nutrition data from the Atlanteans, and so that's how I structure all my thoughts about nutrition and stuff. So you find a problem.
Are you doing
with that,
pre-flood nutrition or post-flood nutrition?
Pre-flood only, yeah. You guys are making some good points about all this stuff, but I'm going to continue avoiding fructose, taking my SSRI, and keeping on with the carnivore diet. But and any other points about this stuff before we move on?
I think you should tell us about birth control, Danny. Okay. I think you need to add that to your regimen.
Got it. So I'm still cursed Jay for sending me this clip, but we'll have to listen to it, and I'll
love Brian Johnson.
Yeah,
got to get the rest.
I'll just have to mute my audio so I don't have to listen to her. Okay, here we go.
They then go on to throw in a description of the Women's Health Institute.
Actually, before this, Jay, do you want to set this clip up really quickly before I just launch into it?
Sure. Yeah, she's debunking birth control lies, and actually, this is talking about one of Carnivore Aurelius's posts. And the biggest reason we wanted to include this clip is because of this conflation between progestins and progesterone, among a couple other kind of claims she makes. And you guys just recently had a video, like a big documentary on birth control, and talked about some of those issues there. So,
okay. Thank you, sir. Oh, here we go.
Study, which they then go on to throw in a description of the Women's Health Institute study, which is a study on estrogen and progesterone in postmenopausal hormonal replacement therapy. And they say that it had to be halted because of the increased incidence of breast cancer. They throw this in randomly, and I thought, why would they do this? And then I realized it's because they're trying to draw in this idea that combined hormonal contraceptives are dangerous and cause cancer. But this finding from the Women's Health Initiative is a completely different discussion. This is postmenopausal women who are on hormonal replacement therapy. And the breast cancer they're discussing is actually related to the progestin side of that study. Like, it is a truth. That truth about the study is true, but it is absolutely not applicable to hormonal contraceptive pills in premenopausal people, because these are postmenopausal people on hormone replacement. And it's absolutely not applicable to estrogen as the cause, because the finding was that progestin was the concern.
Classic medical mind. What do you guys think?
Oh man, that was so painful.
If something causes cancer in one particular group of people, we can never extrapolate that to other human physiology.
I agree.
I had a great one of my buddies on Twitter said something hilarious. He was like, everyone is different. Sometimes estrogen can cause cancer in some people, but it doesn't cause cancer in other people. We're all just individual. But, this is where the history is very valuable, because if this lady understood the history, she would know that the progestin component of menopausal HRT got introduced because the estrogen alone was causing cancer. And they added in the progestins to circumvent that. And it actually did to a certain degree, but it just, ended up causing other problems as well. So that was one of the big things, was that they were causing lots of blood clots and they were causing endometrial cancer because estrogen has this proliferative effect especially on the breast and in the endometrium of the uterus. And then they added in the synthetic progestins that they were already using for birth control to circumvent that in HRT. So that is pretty much the whole argument. And then, I don't know anything about this woman who's speaking, but I would assume that she probably puts some stock into what the WHO has to say. And they actually have put hormonal birth control in their class 1 carcinogen list. So, this isn't even something that, is a crazy conspiracy theory. I mean, I guess it is, because that's just the terminology that we go with. But even the WHO has acknowledged that point. And then conflating progesterone with progestins is very important, because they have completely different actions. So the synthetic progestins work on a variety of different receptors at different orders of magnitude that progesterone does. And more importantly, they have some like non-receptor effects that I still don't think are like really fully understood. But for instance, medroxyprogesterone acetate, one of these synthetic progestins that is used in birth control. So if a girl has ever gone in and gotten like the shot, which is like an injection, a bolus injection of progestin, it's medroxyprogesterone acetate. And they found out through cell culture studies, and unfortunately in the Women's Health Initiative, that it would potentiate the proliferative effect of estrogen, even without acting on any of the estrogen receptors. So that was known, they did that in vitro, that they did that in monkeys, and then unfortunately they did it on women. So you really have all levels of evidence showing that the synthetic progestins had that effect. They basically could potentiate a lot of the estrogenic effects. And then there's the other part, which is that, progesterone has these other metabolites that are very important. One that we could talk about is allopregnanolone. And allopregnanolone is very important for all different types of cognitive function. And then progesterone obviously gets converted into DHEA, et cetera, and down the line. And it's obviously, it goes back and forth with pregnenolone, and it tends to inhibit the HPA axis, whereas the synthetic progestins tend to promote it. So, that was kind of a mouthful, but it's like, sometimes I feel like these people like don't even look into the issue themselves. They just hear a dissenting viewpoint and they're like, oh, no, you're not going to do that. And then like, come back, I'm sitting next to the teacher, basically. Like, that's kind of like how these things seem to operate, because, anyone who has dove into the history and the actual literature about progestins versus progesterone and the history of why the synthetic progestins were made, why they became a part of HRT, because remember, it used to just be estrogen, and they found out that was causing massive amounts of harm, and they added in these synthetic progestins. So that's a pretty open and shut case in my opinion. But there are people are interested. There's one sort of narrative review. It's called In Defense of Progesterone, because in the literature, in the research literature, even people that are in the field will conflate the terminology of progestin and progesterone. So a lot of these studies become very confusing, because you'll read, oh, wow, progesterone doubles my risk for stroke. But then you actually look at the methods and you'll see that, no, it was norethynodrol, which is synthetic progestin, or it was medroxyprogesterone acetate. And they just called it progesterone because there's this underlying assumption that they are the same, when in reality they're not. In this narrative review, they basically went through and they said people need to stop referring to these things as the same. They're clearly different pharmacologically, and they're clearly have different actions on people and in animals. So we need to stop conflating these two. And then they actually looked at the studies where progesterone, bioidentical progesterone was added. And what did they find? Well, they found either no increased risk of any type of cancer or protective effect, which is obviously in line with what we would expect. So yeah, lots to sort of unpack there, but I guess those would be my thoughts.
Yeah. It's the thing too, I would add to that is that there are studies showing that birth control does increase the risk of breast cancer. So whether or not it was even in the population of premenopausal or postmenopausal, like in postmenopausal, there's problems. And then in premenopausal, with women who are taking birth control, there is problems. So it's like I don't even know, like she can make that argument, but then it's like there's still research to support the other side as well. So that's for me, it's like, did she even look? Like you could just go into PubMed and you can just type in effect of birth control on breast cancer, and you'll come with I pulled up 3 studies, went through, and then the other thing they directly say in the studies is for some of the studies, the estrogen only and some of the higher dose estrogen therapies were even worse and had a higher risk of breast cancer than the progesterone or the combination stuff, and even the newer combined stuff that they put out, the lower dose progestogen and the mini pills and whatever else, they still increase the risk. There's still some studies showing associations with increased risk of breast cancer. So it's like her whole argument there is useless because this research is still supporting the other side. And the other thing to tag along is some of the progestogens actually, when they added the progestogens to the estrogen therapy, compared to the bioidentical progesterone, they worsened outcomes. They worse. So estrogen is supposedly cardioprotective, right? So they because it adjusts the lipid profile. But some of the progestins, the synthetic ones, worsened lipid profile overall. They had estrogenic effects. They had other stimulatory effects on breast tissue and other tissues outside of like just having estrogenic effects, like affecting the cell checkpoints and things like that involved in cell replication. And they worsen insulin resistance. And then some of them actually have glucocorticoid-like activity, whereas progesterone has anti-glucocorticoid activity and anti-mineralocorticoid activity. So it's like it's not even close to the same drug. They're not even close to the same thing. A lot of them are a testosterone structure that they modified, and then they call them progestins. But is the bioidentical progesterone is different. The other thing is, God forbid you talk to a doctor about bioidentical progesterone. Like there's papers in PubMed. They're like, this stuff is useless. Like it's not better. The outcomes aren't better than the synthetics. And it's just like, then you go and look at the research. Like, what are you guys just writing opinion pieces? What is this, the New York Times? Come on, guys. This is supposed to be research. We're not here to hear about your opinion about something and what you learned in med school. And so those types of things it's like questionable when you look at mechanisms and you see the association studies and you see these different components and you have some authority saying, oh, well, it's actually this. It's like, are you reading the research? Because it's clear. It's very clear in some of these instances that some of these things are harmful.
Yeah, it's like talking to a typical average doctor about T3 as well. I mean, it's like looked at as poison like fructose. But yeah, just to highlight a couple things coming back to this clip, the Women's Health Initiative study, again, not only showed increased risk of certain types of cancer, but also heart attack, stroke, blood clots, like a lot of really concerning outcomes there. And yeah, as again, just to highlight again, progestin is has more opposite effects of progesterone, the synthetic progestins do, than they do the same effects. Estrogenic activity, mineralocorticoid activity, glucocorticoid activity. So equating them is something that you see all the time. And as we're highlighting, has led to a lot of fear around progesterone itself, and is obviously an incredible disservice to the human population in an effort, or as a just coincidental byproduct. A lot of synthetic progestins get sold along with estrogen. So anyway.
And one of the interesting things is that they actually realized that the mineralocorticoid promoting effect of the synthetic progestins was a problem. So then they tried to create one that had the anti-mineralocorticoid effects. So if you are familiar with the drug spironolactone, they came up with a derivative of spironolactone. I think it's called drospirenone. And then that was packaged with ethinyl estradiol in the birth control Yaz or Yasmin. And then I think it was like 20 years later, it soared literally to number one selling birth control throughout the 2000s. And then I think they had like a condensed litigation in 2019 where Bayer had to pay out $2 billion in settlements for blood clots and strokes and heart attacks that these women were having. And that was with the progestin that was specifically designed to be an anti-mineralocorticoid, more similar to progesterone. But even that, in unison with the estrogen, was probably the worst thing that they ever developed. So that is that's something else to consider. But the what is important to understand is that there's a reason that women have these cycles of higher estrogen and then higher progesterone. And that's because estrogen's primary role in the body is to be a proliferative hormone. So it's not any surprise that, if you are trying to grow the endometrium in preparation for a fetus to be, to inhabit it essentially, and then to grow the breasts for lactation and to grow the actual fetus, you need a lot of this growth hormone, this estrogen. That's its role. So it should not really come as a surprise that if you're just going to be administering tons of estrogen, that you're going to have the quintessential growth, like excess growth disease, which is cancer.
Yep. And the other thing to add to that too is the progesterone is the differentiating hormone. So you grow the tissue and then the progesterone directs it into proper development. And so it's like just giving estrogen is okay. We're just going to stimulate growth now all the time. And we're not going to differentiate. And then it's like, okay, well, maybe we need the progesterone. It's like, so we're going to develop these derivatives that don't have the progestogenic effect that we're looking for. We have some synthetic progestogens, and they worsen the effects of estrogen to some extent. In some cases,
and they shut down your natural progesterone production on top of that.
Yes.
So it's just a complete shit show.
And I would wonder too if the synthetic progestins are I actually would doubt that they are able to have the effect of neurosteroids in terms of like creating the proper neurosteroid balance. Because again, like if you are shutting down that whole pathway, this is some of the problems with like TRT. Those are some of the like hypothesized problems with TRT. And then also obviously the 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, which these are a little bit different. But shutting down the whole hormonal production pathway may have some negative effects on neurosteroid synthesis. And birth control is essentially castration and replacement, right? So you're just shutting down the whole hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis so that you won't get pregnant. You're not going to have your cycle to any large extent. And then it's like, well, it's funny too, because it's like, oh, there's no problem with this, right? And then on the flip side with guys, it's like, God forbid you go on TRT and you're trying to come off. It's like this whole thing. But women, no, just hop off birth control. It'll be completely fine. We just, it's not like your hormonal system is more delicate than a man's because you have to cycle every single month to get pregnant. It's completely, there's no damage. It's completely normal.
When you look at the history, the number of times that different estrogen or progestin derivatives have been sold for all sorts of different potential benefits, and then decades later have been taken off the market for really horrible effects, quote unquote side effects, is astounding. Like looking at that history should make anybody extremely hesitant to recommend anything here. And it just keeps happening, right? Like at the time, all the doctors recommend it. A couple of decades later, it's off the market. There's all these lawsuits and everything, but they're already promoting the next one. It just doesn't end.
I can think of a current example of that, but we can move on.
I don't think we can talk about that one here, Danny.
The last thing I was going to say is maybe if estrogen was called Adipin, or I know there are a few other names that were thrown out, well, you wouldn't be in this entire mess, but maybe we would. Who knows?
Well, actually, serotonin used to be called enteramine, and it also used to be called thrombotin.
Oh
There you
boy,
go.
yeah.
Although even serotonin itself is still talking about vasoconstriction, and that still doesn't
Yeah.
scare anyone from it. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think people realize that it means that though. Like that you're causing an increase in tone in the vasculature. But
Okay, so
anyway,
we'll move on here to why is the right so obsessed with seed oils? And did anybody give this article a read? It's really bad.
I would not even recommend anybody read it.
Yeah, it's
an absolutely useless article.
They really don't get into any. They're referencing, I think, carnivore Aurelius again, but they're not getting into any of the actual substance of any debate that's going on, and so they're just immediately asking experts to expand on what the carnivore Aurelius Instagram posts are saying, and it's kind of a nothing burger. But I don't know. Do you guys have any other thoughts on this?
I think
You
it might
see what
have been
appeal to
written by-
authority does.
Yeah.
Good.
I was going to say, I think it might have been written by the woman who did the birth control videos.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's like, look at the appeal to authority. It's like, you have this example. We're just showing you this authority. And then like now we have an article with appeal to authority. And then I think this article outside of the seed oil stuff is just a good example of how the media machine just tries to take anything down, right? It's like associate with a bunch of things that have like some type of negative. So right-wing crypto bros, all of these types of things. And then like even in the article, like at one point for the value of the seed oils, they literally cite Healthline. It's just like, it's such a trash article. The fact that somebody's even on staff to write this garbage
It was probably
is
AI.
hilarious.
Let's be real here. It's probably an AI article.
Maybe, yeah.
Well, it's similar. I think Vice did an article on the whole thing. Maybe it was like a year or two ago. But yeah, it's just like you just wonder what the initiative is there, because nobody that is convinced by the anti-PUFA or anti-seed oil arguments is going to then be convinced by some random doctor in an article saying, "Oh no, the experts agree," because the whole thing about being anti-seed oil or, questioning the validity of the narrative around vegetable oils or polyunsaturated fats or any of this is because you distrust those authorities. So I don't know why they would think that bringing in some doctor, some RD and having them say, "Oh, now the experts agree," like it's actually good.
You know,
like, is that really intended to convince anyone?
You know how
that thinks otherwise?
I'm so sorry to interrupt, Dalton. Like, you know how I think this plays out in real life? Since most people only read the headlines, like you'll be this anti-seed oil guy or whatever, and then one of your friends or something that violently disagrees with you will just gloss past this headline, and then that will confirm their suspicions or something that you're incorrect. But I felt like I had come across that type of situation many, many, many times. And so this is just to keep people in line, not to fall out of ranks. And I don't know. That's kind of my hypothesis.
Well, I also think it forces people to conflate any types of these ideas with things that they should, like normal people, normies, whatever you want to call them, that automatically assume that these things are bad.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if somebody starts talking to you and says like there's problems with omega-6 and seed oils, it's like, oh, they're a Nazi. That's it. It's a Nazi. it's a right winger. He's a crypto bro. Like he's anti-government. Just like throw it. He's all these terms like he's anti, Black Lives Matters movement, all this stuff. So you associate everybody in this one group. And then so if you're exposed to any of these ideas, you automatically think, oh, this person is this.
Now this podcast
and it's like, meanwhile,
never be
it's like
monetized.
None of these belief systems have anything to do with right wing or anything like that. It's like you choosing not to have vegetable oils has nothing to do with your political affiliation.
Yeah, man, just separating people into perverse pseudo families to separate everybody over absolutely everything. Jay, what do you think?
Yeah, totally. It's the same divide and conquer tactic, that's used with every opinion. It's here's your opinion because the evil people think the opposite of this, or think the evil people think this thing, so you have to think the opposite. I mean, it's obviously it's an article with no substance, and reading through it is I mean, yeah, they throw it all out there, right? Conspiracy theories and, in new age conspiracy theories become a health threat. Talking about Paul Saladino, talking about how this is the same as anti-sunscreen movements. It's the same as anti-feminism movements. And they just, they conflate it all. And obviously have their substance is citing a doctor who said that vegetable oils are better for heart disease.
And balance is key.
But right. Balance is key. Butter is high in saturated fat. So don't eat butter. Yeah. What is this?
Hey, he's from Harvard though. So clearly he knows what he's doing.
Well, I thought Harvard said that ice cream was good.
True.
What is it? 13 miles away from the Pfizer headquarters or something. It's like they're like right next to each other. Something ridiculous. Go ahead, Jack.
And they're saying that the one quote, like saying if you consume too much fried food, then it's bad. But it's not bad by itself. It's just because people are having too much of it. None of it makes any sense.
Yeah, it's supposed to just garble your brain. It's not supposed to make any sense. That's like, I know I've said this before, but the like, how if you go to The Guardian, it's like strawberries are the best food ever. And then the next month, it's like strawberries are the most toxic food ever. That just must be a coordinated effort to make people second guess like every thought that they possibly have. It's like psychological warfare of confusion. And there's actually even a paper in or even in the OSS before the CIA, they were talking about making people confused as a way to just disorient them. And so we're just living in the era of like an extreme version of that. But before I even get this podcast even more demonetized, we should probably move on. So this next clip is our all of our favorites, Dave Asprey and Paul Saladino. And so as a lot of people know, Paul has moved closer and closer to what Ray Peat was saying over the last few years. And he kind of bumps heads with Asprey over orange juice and supplementation. So let's listen to this and we'll tell you what we think.
Peat community. I had George
Let me slow this down. This was on J speed. And so we got to slow it down for the average brain people.
Podcast a couple of times. The Ray Peat community is actually quite excited about fructose. And
I love those guys. Even back 20 years ago when I ran the anti-aging nonprofit group in Silicon Valley, we talk about Ray Peat, but I mean, this is a guy who will tell you cottage cheese and a can of Coke is a great breakfast. I mean, like it's like there's interesting thinking, and then there's like, what the hell? And if you try that stuff, I see people kind of go down the rat hole there. It feels like a little bit orthorexic, but his idea of mitochondria being important is absolutely true. Their idea of I have to make sure I get enough fructose every day to be healthy. Man, I have a hard time.
They think that Georgie's pointed out some interesting stuff to me about benefits of fructose involving, kind of helping to balance phosphate in the human diet. They pointed out the importance of the calcium phosphorus ratio, which is something that I don't think a lot of people think about. We're eating meat without getting enough calcium from milk. That appears to affect things negatively. You can check your parathyroid hormone if you're not sure if you're getting enough calcium, but I'll talk more in the next podcast next week, guys, with Georgie about the calcium phosphorus ratio. But fructose does seem to have benefits from a phosphorus perspective in the human diet. And I think
that's a cool idea.
Yeah. I'll just say this. When Ray recommends Coke and cottage cheese, I think like, well, I'm not going to drink Coke, but he's recommending like a Mexican Coke that has sucrose and not high fructose corn syrup. I don't think Coke is great because of the caramel color. And the Ray Peat folks have also pointed out, the importance of being aware of caramel color. But I think that they're one of the things that I think that they would say that like this is something that anyone could do anywhere in the world, and that they are not afraid of sucrose, which is something that again I've talked with Georgie about. And I don't see the point in consuming sucrose because then you're getting calories with no micronutrients. I'd rather get.
Oh, come on! You just dropped into the Andy world right there. It doesn't matter. You're not getting micronutrients from brown sugar or from honey. There's not meaningful amounts of them in there, Paul. You're getting sugar. It's for fuel. If you want micronutrients, take a fucking vitamin or eat some liver. Come on.
Well, I'm thinking like fruit juice, Dave, like orange juice, right? I'm going to get
there's so much vitamin C in there.
Thiamine. Boy. There's a good amount of thiamine in orange juice and other nutrients.
Compared to the thiamine that I took, in fact, the benfotiamine that I took this morning, the fast soluble form that works way better, that had hundreds of times more than your stupid orange juice. Yeah, Paul.
Oh, man.
Why not get it from food, Dave?
I'm just trolling you right now.
I know you are. You're super trolling me.
Okay, we'll cut it off right there. That's about as much as I can take. Okay, so much to unpack there. So one, kudos to Paul for actually laying out valuable talking points. But Dave seems like he's irritated that somebody's interrupting him speaking, and he likes the sound of his own voice. So what do you guys think about that whole thing?
Yeah, that was just like really rude. It was like really uncomfortable. Like Paul had to like kind of just let Dave dig at him and then like be polite about it.
Well, the thing that is really striking to me is that when I went to Ancestral Health Symposium in 2011, and my buddy had drove me there, and he was like, "Don't you know who the Bulletproof Executive is?" And I was like, "I have no clue who that is." And that was Dave, and he was talking about his coffee pretty early on. And but then I remember becoming aware of his blog and him writing lots about fructose, and maybe circa 2012, people were commenting saying, "Hey, you're wrong about fructose. This Ray Peat has this point of view." And he's had a very long time to get acquainted with at least kind of like the bare bones of what Ray has been saying for all this time. And it really doesn't seem like Dave is even remotely familiar with it. And so again, as a health person, I guess, that is extremely popular, it's probably good to do your due diligence about other perspectives and to at least steelman them before torpedoing them down, or saying that your like supplements are better than the natural foods. And I don't even think that's a legit comparison. It's absolutely laughable that you could compare a supplement to a natural food, in my estimation. But I don't know, what else do you guys think?
You know, I read a tweet a couple months ago, and the guy said Ray Peat essentially has a trucker diet. It's aspirin, cigarettes, and Pepsi. And I was laughing. I was like, is that how far that this has gone, where people don't even attempt to like read or listen to anything that he actually said?
Well, that's easier than trying to figure it out, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that I had said. It was like, you know, people say that, you know, being into Ray Peat is this huge trend, but what the real trend is criticizing what he had to say without actually reading it. Because you know, if Dave is, you know, first of all, yeah, I don't think that you can even compare like a supplement to a food. And if that's your, you know, barometer that like, oh yeah, taking 200 milligrams of benfotiamine is a better source of thiamine than drinking orange juice. It's like, okay, so then why do you even eat food at all? Like you should literally just have a purified diet of specific amino acid blends and specific bioavailable, you know, micronutrients, and you'll have a better diet than all of us, or if you can even call it a diet at that point. But yeah, I mean, the thing is that like, I actually kind of agree when he's saying like, yeah, like honey and like sugar, like they don't have any like real nutritional value. I agree with him in the sense that like, yeah, that's not like a reason to say that like honey is better than sugar or whatever the case may be. But then I would kind of flip it on its head and be like, well, sugar is the nutrient, because that is, you know, you can have all of the thiamine in the world, but it doesn't matter how much pyruvate dehydrogenase activity you have if you don't have any glucose to fuel that enzyme to do what it's supposed to do. You know, they're called macronutrients for a reason as well. You know, you don't just need vitamins and minerals, as important as they are. And no one is saying that you want to not eat liver or not eat oysters or not eat eggs or not even eat meat. But you know, to say that like, you know, it's better to take vitamins than to get it in food, it's just not even like a comparable argument. It would be like saying like, it's good to like I like to listen to music more than I like to tie my shoes. And it's like, I don't even, what kind of comparison is that? Like, you're just talking about two completely different things. And yeah, I mean, props to Paul for sure. I mean, he's really good at keeping his head level. But the one thing I do want to say is that when he says like this stuff borders on orthorexia, I think it's really interesting, because the whole thing about, you know, what Pete was writing about was to gets you outside of the restriction box and to understand why your body does the things that it does or reacts the way that it does to certain situations or certain foods. And that is literally the subtitle of his most famous book. It's called Generative Energy. The subtitle is Restoring the Wholeness of Life, right? It's not, cutting around the edges of life and staying in this one box of life. It is about, giving your body the opportunity to live in this state of abundance where you can have different foods, where you can do different things, and you're liberated from, the metabolic energy essentially to be able to do those things. So in my view, it's the complete opposite of orthorexia. It's literally trying to get all of these ideas about, what is healthy and what is not out of your head and start actually living your life properly.
I don't know if I've said this before. I kind of have like a personal beef with people that say orthorexia, because when I was real ill, like it seemed like the paradigm that I was using was not actually getting me to where I wanted to be. And so therefore I try harder, like I'd become more low carb. And then when people would say, oh, you're being too orthorexic, it was like, this is my life. Like, these are the health problems I'm having and I'm trying to overcome them. And I'm using this paradigm. Like, at the time I didn't understand this, but it was flawed. And so I thought if I was more aggressive with it, that I'd have a better outcome. And so I don't know. Orthorexia is kind of like a gaslighting term to me. It's like, it's not for anybody who's truly been sick. It's almost like a term I think only somebody who doesn't know they're sick or has never actually been ill would use, because I don't know. I think it's just not a valuable term. Like, again, like calling somebody a Nazi or something, just absolute meaningless these days.
It's like, I think the saying is like, a healthy person has 100 problems, but a sick person only has one.
Yeah. Very good.
I completely agree, and that's why people turn to these type of things, because when you're in the state of, constant anxiety or constant lethargy or not being able to eat or not being able to do the things that you want to be able to do, you are going to become obsessive over it, because it's your life. If you're not going to obsess about getting a better quality of life, then what should you be obsessing about?
The new Marvel movie.
People that, well, there you have it. So I guess it all kind of comes full circle there, but yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jay.
Well, I was going to come back to Dave's incredibly weak argument about the nutrients here. He's trolling. And just come back to the idea that as you said, it's true that honey and sugar don't have many nutrients, but also what is the biggest source of Dave's calories? Let's talk bulletproof coffee. Like, how many nutrients are in there, right? Like in your MCT oil and coffee.
Coconut and butter.
Right. And butter, which has like a tiny bit of vitamin A. And also, if you're going to be taking supplements to get all your nutrients, then it's fine to have pure, cane sugar versus MCT oil. Both are nutrient poor. There's no issue with either of those. You're not going to get your thiamine from meat either. His whole premise here is obviously ridiculous, which is why he has to do it under this guise of trolling, because he doesn't actually have any legitimate argument and, looks at the Ray Peat diet as the trucker diet. And so, what? It's just weak and
he's the only thing is that he's just like, and this is the problem with all these types of arguments online, is Paul is saying one thing and then Dave is just changing the frame of the argument. And so Paul is saying you want to have some carbohydrate and these sources are good. And then Dave is making it about nutrients. And then it's like, well, if the frame then becomes, well, most important thing is nutrients, then from that context, yeah, sure. Benfotiamine as a thiamine source is going to give you a higher amount and maybe more bioavailable than food. Fine. But there's no argument being made that you can't use supplements. And there's no argument being made that you have to only eat oranges to get your thiamine intake. The argument from the entire Peat perspective is about having a nutrient dense diet with the correct amount of macronutrients and things that work for your body and whatnot, and then go from there. It's not to only have sugar at the expense of everything else. And the arguments always devolve into this garbage context of you either have to have this or that, instead of understanding this is an entire context that's being built out, and it's about figuring out how to create these things and work with them for yourself, like use your own knowledge. And I think that ties in with the orthorexia stuff. Cause I remember there's a lot of people who would get on me, like family members, about how I was eating and what I was doing and all this type of stuff. And it's like, what is more intelligent than trying to figure out through your own personal experiences and what works for you? Like, why would you not want to do that? If you find out that this particular food is giving you this series of symptoms and problems, and you eliminate it and it drastically solves that, and now your quality of life is better, what is the argument against that? Like, please, somebody give me a strong logical argument against taking things into your own hands and solving your own problems, and then strategically figuring out ways around that problem. Like, for example, for me, I don't tolerate dairy very well, but I do understand the importance of calcium and phosphorus. So am I orthorexic because I don't have that much dairy in my diet? Am I at risk of these micronutrient problems, according to the Rolling Stones article, because I minimize polyunsaturated fats because of the known problems that they discuss in the literature? It's like, to make an argument against that is foolish. The idea here is to use principles to guide your decisions and your personal experiences, your perceive, think, act, to create a system or to create a lifestyle or some type of setup that works for you so you can overcome your challenges, your problems, or whatever the deal is. And all of these other counter arguments to this type of stuff, or straw manning it, or talking about orthorexia or everything in moderation garbage, it's like almost inactivating for people. I'm not going to give you any tools to solve your problem. I'm just going to tell you that what you're doing is dumb or doesn't work, or you have a psychological problem or this or that. And for me, it's like one of the things that actually triggers me the worst, because when I was in my worst state and I hear, oh, everything in moderation, it's like, well, what's moderation? Like, what's a moderate amount of polyunsaturated fats? Is it less than 4 grams for 2,000 calories, or is it 20 grams per day of omega-6? Like, it's such an arbitrary thing to discuss. So the question is not everything in moderation or orthorexia. Is what is your outcome? What is your goal? What are the principles? How are things working? How are you thinking about things? And then within those contexts, what makes sense? Like, if you want to live a long time, minimize chronic disease, and improve your ability to oxidize glucose and whatnot, number one, you're going to have glucose. And you're going to have glucose. You're going to have thiamine, and you're probably not going to have a high amount of polyunsaturated fatty acids. It's like that. This is not orthorexia. This is intelligent, strategic thinking. This is what you want to be doing, instead of just, taking your SSRI and like, yeah, whatever. I'll just have this. I'll just have these, my Chipotle cooked in rice bran oil. I'm fine with that. Don't worry about it. It's probably completely fine. That guy at Harvard said it was cool.
And then the people, they still have like so many people, I don't know, normies that'll say you're orthorexic or why are you doing all this stuff? And they're like, yeah, I just wish I could lose weight, or like, I wish I wasn't so tired throughout the day. It's like, I don't know how to help you.
Yeah, they have like suicidal fatigue, and I mean that's the trope of people not wanting you to change. You're saying, hey, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and if they feel stuck or something, that must be a serotonergic type of behavior or something of not wanting people to get better than you or something.
Yeah, they literally, like, I feel like the way society structures things for people is it like completely inactivates people's ability to rely on their own experiences, right? It's like, God forbid you don't use the hierarchy of evidence, and it's every decision you make. Like, if I want to tie my shoe, like the best way to do it, I need a meta-analysis. Like, that's exactly what I need to do this, instead of like, let me take my own personal experience and let me work with that. But no, we just need this. So it sets people up. They don't have self-responsibility. They don't have self-reliability. And inside the health journey, if you don't take responsibility for yourself, you are very unlikely to get better. Somebody else is not going to be able to tell you how this food or this supplement or this thing that you're doing affects you. Only you can tell you that by experiencing and being aware of yourself. And this is not like, this is a tangent, and I don't want to go too far down it, but it's like, that's the whole problem with some of the precision medicine stuff as well. It's like, you need all these external markers to tell you how you're doing. You need a stool test every day, and you need your HRV, and you need your CGM and all this type of stuff. And like, don't listen to how you feel. Like, these things will tell you. This expert will interpret that and tell you what's going on. And then that's where you get in these weird things. Like, I think in that video, Dave and Paul were going back and forth about lab values and stuff. And so it's that type of stuff. It's just, yeah, there's multiple components there that I see as highly problematic, inactivating to people and taking away their own guidance. And I think those things are, you need your own guidance, you need your self-responsibility, and you need to figure things out. And you can have somebody work with you or help you, or you can read somebody else's research, but it's going to come down to you.
Yeah, 100%, all that stuff. And to kind of just tie it all together, like, that's why when I hear people, you know, basically shit on Ray or whatever, you know, it's one thing to disagree with the specific principles, but at the end of the day, his whole thing is about generating energy, lowering stress, and listening to your body and trying to figure these things out for yourself and letting that be your ultimate guidance, you know, perceive, think, act. And it's like, I don't know how you can argue against those principles. Like, so you would have to say that, you know, I think being more stressed is good. I think having less energy is good. And I think that not listening to my body is better. But you look around and that's the paradigm that most people are stuck in. So
yeah.
With that,
actually, stress is good is the paradigm that people are stuck in.
That's
yeah.
Hormesis plus, as you said, don't listen to your own body, only the meta-analyses and evidence-based medicine. That's all we got.
Also work
Some authority
and grind as hard as we possibly can.
Totally. Yeah. No pain, no gain.
Exactly. With that, anything before I wrap up the show here?
No, it was a pleasure having you guys on. This was, I think, a great chat.
Yeah, what a super fun episode. Hey, thank you so much, Dalton. Thank you so much, Jack. We had tons of tech issues before this show. It's actually amazing it even happened. So Dalton, Jack, you guys are geniuses. Thank you so much for your contribution to everything. Really appreciate it. And where can we find more of your work on the internet this week, Dalton and Jack?
Well, first of all, thank you guys. You know, obviously Generative Energy and then later the helpline and all of your guys' work over the years has been so instrumental to everything that we've done in my personal life. So can't thank you guys enough. And it's pretty cool how it's come full circle. And now it's like, oh wow, like we're on their show. It's kind of cool. So, really appreciate all of that kind words. And yeah, like I said, we're just getting started at ANO. You know, this is we really want this to be sort of like our legacy, and we're going to keep trying to put out information and put out services and pointing people in the what we believe to be a positive direction, and continue to grow. So, best places to find us, always YouTube, Analyze and Optimize, Twitter at Outdoctrination. So like indoctrination, but with an out. And then Instagram is at Analyze and Optimize. And Danny, I can send you like our little like link tree style thing where you can find all of our stuff, but those would be the big ones.
Awesome. Hey, Dalton, Jack, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it. Fantastic episode. Super fun chatting with you guys.